Hello and welcome. My name is John Yanofsky. I'm the director of Kupferberg Center for the Arts at Queens College, and thanks for joining us for tonight's KCA online program, which is presented by New York Community Bank. It's good to see you all again back here online, and I hope and trust that you're all safe and in good health and spirits. This evening is special for us. Tonight, we're thrilled to feature composer and multi-instrumentalist Amir El Safar, which is presented tonight as part of the Jazz Touring Network, which is a program of the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation. And as we celebrate the new 2021-22 season tonight, which will feature a blend of virtual programs like tonight as well as in-person events. Our first ticketed program is happening this Saturday, November 20th, with the great pianist Eddie Palmieri, and we will continue with other in-person events throughout the season. But we do want to take a minute always to thank our funders and our sponsors who help make our programs like tonight possible to bring to people like yourselves at home. New York Community Bank, which is our title season sponsor, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the Max and Selma Kupferberg Family Foundation, the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation, and all of you. So thank you. And that brings us to tonight, which we're really in for a treat and a special kind of program, which is going to be unique for us here at KCA. And to introduce and kind of set it up, I want to bring in my colleague, Carlos Cuestas, who's been programming so much of our outstanding virtual content. I want to bring Carlos into the studio to introduce the program for this evening. So Carlos, good to see you.
Hey, John. It's good to see you as well. We have been seeing each other live. We've seen each other online. Definitely, life is coming back to normal. So very, very excited to be here tonight as well, and trying to make digital programming part of our KCA approach to performing arts. And yeah, as you were mentioning, so tonight we have Amir El Safar. He is a recipient of the Doris Duke Performing Artist Award, and he's also a 2018 U.S. Artist Fellow. Amir is an expert trumpeter with a classical background, and he is conversant not only in the language of contemporary jazz, but has created techniques to play microtones and ornaments which are idiomatic to Arabic music that are not typically heard on the trumpet. So that is actually very, very interesting. And in addition, he is a purveyor of the centuries-old, now endangered Iraqi maqam, and he performs actively as a vocalist and santur player as well. So we are in for a treat, definitely. And I would like to invite Amir into our studio.
Hello, Carlos. Hi, John. Great to
Hey,
see you
Amir.
both. So great to be here. Thank you so much for hosting me as part of the KCA online performances and conversations. It's really a joy and honor to be a part of it.
That's great. And where are you tuning in from? I know you've been traveling quite a bit. You're keeping a very busy schedule. Are you back home for a minute?
Yeah, I'm home for the time being, but yeah, I was away for much of September and October, but I'm glad to be settling down a little bit. It seems like, that type of travel was the norm in the pre-COVID days, and now it seems like a lot more work to carry all my instruments and board planes and get on trains and be involved in all these international projects. But I'm actually really happy to be home for a good bit right now.
Well, that's great. And we'll take a minute to be still for an hour or so and really descend into your music and have an opportunity to chat with you about an incredible kind of groove and body of work that you are involved in. So really looking forward to having this pause in your busy life to really get close with your music.
Cool. Yeah, me too. It's rare that I have a chance to present more than one project in one. So that's one of the benefits of an event like this. Because when we're live, either it's going to be, the Two Rivers Ensemble, which we're about to see, or a flamenco group or a raga group. And there's so many different manifestations and iterations within my work. But tonight we're actually going to have a chance to see 5 different ensembles, each from recent live performances. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And as we prepare to experience your work and for us to engage in that conversation, I also want to invite our audiences on YouTube to feel free to participate, comment, say hi, and express your support, ask questions. A reminder that we're going to have a live Q&A session with Amir at the end of the music and the video. Sorry. So yeah, just please bring in your comments, bring in your support. We love bringing you guys on screen, all your comments. So yeah, let's make this as interactive as possible. So Amir, what do we have in store first for us?
So yeah, we're going to be seeing and hearing several of my projects, which I just mentioned. And the first one is actually a group that's been together for 15 years. It's called the Two Rivers Ensemble, comprised of 6 musicians. And the idea of this project is to combine Iraqi maqam music. So this is a centuries-old musical practice that's been performed in coffee houses and in sultans' courts and various palaces and other venues, as well as private homes and gardens in Iraq for literally thousands of years. And combining that maqam tradition with contemporary jazz, which I had a background in and still perform in that world. So 2 very different aesthetics that actually have some historical and musical relationships that I won't get into right now, because I actually think it's better to just let the music speak for itself. So this performance that we're about to see is from August 15th at Little Island. Some of you may have heard of this incredible island in the Hudson River. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I highly recommend it, especially when the weather gets nice again. And we were part of the enormous festival that was commemorating the beginning of Little Island. And this was also the first time that Two Rivers performed together since the pandemic. So it was a very powerful and emotional event for us. And it was kind of our 15-year anniversary concert. So without further ado, let's watch Two Rivers live at Little Island.
like I feel like I have to applause. I was like right there. I was right there with you.
Thank you so much.
So I mean, what's it like as you're like a detached observer of your own work? From just a few months ago, what's kind of your first reaction to listening and watching that performance?
Well, I have to be honest, I was really electrified by it. And I'm not saying it to brag about my work, because actually I think it's the band, and they're just such incredible musicians. And I partly chose this clip. I'm not super featured. I mean, we can talk about my work as a trumpet player and soloist later, but I really just love the way everybody in my band plays, and I've heard this recording many times because I was involved in editing it. But every time I listen to it, I hear something new. And what I really like and appreciate about what's happening with this music is it's not just representing an ancient maqam tradition and a modern jazz tradition, just sort of putting them together. Each of the musicians is really exploring with every solo, in the process of improvisation, in the process of creation, in the moment, in front of the audience. There's also an exploration happening, and we're sort of, the musicians are egging each other on and pushing each other to go in places that they haven't gone before, and to play in a new way. And I think that is what keeps it fresh, and that's why even after listening multiple times, I'm excited by it. Like I feel myself being riveted by it, and it may be because I also have a few months of distance from it, so I don't feel so involved. But yeah, it reminds me how much I love my band, and how much I love playing music with them.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that was wonderful. Yeah, the trumpet with the saxophone, when you guys are doing the unison so quickly, it sounds like the texture is almost like the mizmar. Like in a way, it's like a new instrument that you're exploring, and that's fantastic. And again, we want to remind our audiences to participate, to comment, to ask Amir any questions that they may have. This is a sort of community conversation, so we definitely invite our audience members to participate. And yeah, so let's do some more of this, right?
Sure, I'm down. So you want to hear another project, something completely different? So a couple of years ago, I was invited by Brooklyn Raga Massive. They're a community of musicians. They don't actually all live in Brooklyn. Some of them live in Queens. Some of them live in Manhattan. I don't think it's a prerequisite. The main theme that unites this group is the raga, and raga is a modal system, a melodic system that's practiced in India. And anyone who's heard Ravi Shankar, who's probably the most famous musician now, his daughter Anushka has also made quite a name for herself playing the sitar, and all of the music that they're making is based on a system of modes or scales called ragas. And there's some similarity with Western music in some places where they diverge. But the Brooklyn Raga Massive approached me about composing a new piece for them, basically an hour-and-a-half long piece that we've recorded on an album that's not out yet. It's going to come out in 2022. But we did also a couple of performances. One was at Lincoln Center Out of Doors this past August, July, a couple of weeks before the video that we just saw. But what we're going to watch now is a video of Raga Maqam from almost exactly a year ago. I think it was November 1st, 2020. And this was, of course, during the height of the pandemic, and most of us had not been in a room with, more than 20 people, much less played music together. So it was really an extraordinary moment of reconnection and sort of communing around music for the first time in at that point. I think it had been 9 months or so. So and this project, just to give you a little background, is exploring the raga modal system and the maqam modal system. So maqam, I just told you about how it exists in Iraq, but it's also there are maqam practices in a much larger part of the world than we even realize sometimes. It's the Arab world, but it's also Turkey, it's Central Asia, it's North Africa, parts of Southern Europe, parts of even Sub-Saharan Africa have this maqam music. But maqam and raga have always existed sort of in parallel, but never quite mixed over the centuries. So this project was really about exploring the possibilities of combining raga modes and maqam modes and finding out what happens. So, and there's quite a large group. I think we were 15 on stage. So let's watch it. Raga Maqam live at Pioneer Works.
Right. Yeah. It was definitely a very different impression.
Hmm.
Incredible. Incredible. Uh, I was struck by this question, like, was this sacred music? Is this secular music? Does that question matter? But were ragas, were they of either kind of style traditionally? And how did you approach kind of your piece that kind of was blending the two?
Yeah, and I do get questions a lot about, is this a sacred text? Is it secular? And the relationship between the two. And the answer is it's a bit fluid, and music is not necessarily divided in terms of, I mean, there are sacred events and sacred rituals, and of course, it could be a Hindu temple, or it could be a mosque, or a synagogue or a church. In that case, it would, and in that case, the texts would be more liturgical. Um, but even in secular contexts, oftentimes the texts, in like especially with the raga, would be about deities and Hindu gods. And in the case of maqam, and in Islam specifically, there would be about the divine and about God. And it's very oftentimes nebulous. Like the poem the one who is singing at the very end is Hamid Saadi. He's my teacher from Iraq, and I brought him here 3 years ago um, through a fellowship, and now he's teaching at Sarah Lawrence and was at Rutgers before the pandemic. And the poem that he's singing is actually it's a Sufi poem, and it's about one's love for God and one's connection to God, but read in a different way. It could be love for a human being. And so oftentimes these texts are sort of playing with that, and maybe also questioning our daily life and the manifestations that we see in our day to day. Are they separate from the divine reality, or is there some connection, or are they expressions of the divine? And it's a beautiful, there's a lot of beautiful philosophies about it, but I think the music and the sound of these modes, and even the instruments themselves, evoke something that's very deeply spiritually rooted.
Yeah, and that's something that was so tangible, but like bringing those two seemingly different traditions of raga and makam together, it's haunting in a way I wasn't expecting, to be honest. Like, but all positive, of course, and but very effective in many ways, and effective. But anyway, I keep encouraging our audiences to, right, John, to keep writing to us
Yeah,
and
the exclaim, can, shout, give Amir some feedback as if we were in concert. Like, he'll be able to see that. Please
mhm.
respond as you feel the music. Please respond in kind.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Amir, well, let's keep on going. Would you like to introduce the next song for us, please?
Yeah. So I think actually the rivers analogy is apt for kind of what this musical journey that we're on this evening, because we started with two rivers, which was maqam and jazz, and then raga and maqam in the last video, and now we're going to see little snippet. It's just short segments from a piece called Luminescencia, and that is working with flamenco. And flamenco singing and flamenco dance and the guitar and the whole world of flamenco has a lot of there's a lot of overlap with maqam and even Arabic culture. And there was an Arab occupation of southern Spain for 800 years, and that ended just at the beginning of the end of the 15th century. So in other words, just before Columbus discovered the Americas, was kind of the very end of the Arab presence in Spain. And that's a kind of a significant moment when the world changed in sort of modernity, the Renaissance and Enlightenment, and everything that we know for the last 500 years kind of began. So, but still within the flamenco singing, there's a lot of maqam elements that have remained. I mean, flamenco is its own tradition, has its own unique amalgam of gypsy influences and even influences from what we now call the Americas, since Spain was, Spanish people were going back and forth, and very, very strong North African influence as well. But there's elements of maqam that are sometimes more obvious than others. So this particular project has a flamenco singer that I spent 3 months traveling throughout Spain, finding my collaborators, and it wasn't very easy. It's a very tricky combination, as you'll hear. But a singer, there's a dancer. The singer's from Granada, the dancer's from Sevilla, the percussionist is from Madrid, and then my sister is playing viola. She was also in the previous video. You might recognize her from that video. And then there's another musician who's bringing electronics, live processing of the sound that we're creating. And this was to kind of imagine a new context, not trying to be historically true to this tradition meets that tradition, but actually create something that hasn't been heard and opens the imagination to new possibilities. So let's give a listen. This is Luminescencia from the Flamenco Biennale in the Netherlands in 2019.
Por momentos mi martirio se estaban doblando por no encontrarme contigo. Yo sufrí un desengaño, eres mi peor enemigo. Ay, que hasta verte me hace daño. Papelón de esos que llaman diario. Aparece un millonario rico de la población. Rompiendo la espiga, van por la herida. A las 12 o la 1, ay, ay, cuando son sopla el viento.
Yeah, I wish I was at that concert too, Amir.
Well, I'll let you know the next time we perform live. I hope you can come be a part of it.
Yeah, and what's becoming clear through these at least these three excerpts, and I would imagine these other two we're going to see is this idea of this new vocabulary that you're building from these kind of different languages, these different musical languages, and I really felt that here, kind of really evoked by the fierceness of the flamenco dancer, and just kind of curious of how you are trying to create, your own compositional voice within these different threads and rivers of influence and styles that, really are very distinct within your work.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's really based on listening and listening to what's already there. Because a lot of times the answers are in the music itself, in what's already happening. So I spent a long time choosing the right people to join me in this group, and as I mentioned before, it wasn't easy because, I mean, the most notable thing when you think about flamenco, the guitar is the most obvious and sort of the first instrument that you think of, and part of the impetus, and actually I was even commissioned to do something using microtones and that would sort of imagine alternative space, and the guitar doesn't play microtonally, and I don't want to get into the details of what microtones versus equal temperament and Western tuning are, but basically the piano and the guitar are tuned in sort of a more like a grid type of system, whereas the voice, the singing in maqam and in flamenco as well, are using a lot of slides and sometimes landing on a note that's in between the space that these equal tempered instruments can play, and that's part of the dynamic tension of flamenco. But the person who commissioned this piece from me actually wanted me to find an alternative microtonal space, so that's why we have a santur and the viola kind of creating another harmony that we wouldn't hear on the guitar, and then also the electronics, by taking the notes that the singer sings and then kind of displacing them and extending them through time, those sounds are able to create a kind of a chord or a kind of harmony. And then the other thing that's happening, and you mentioned the fierceness, I mean, there's an energy in flamenco that's, it's duende, but it's also, duende is this word that's used for the kind of affect and the powerful emotional impact that the singing and the rhythm can have. But there's also something very specifically Spanish and that's doesn't, like, there was a point even in our rehearsal process, and I have to be honest, transcultural, as I call it, transcultural musical meetings are not always easy. In addition to the musical differences, there's cultural differences that manifest linguistically, but also just in terms of how we work together, what the expectations are. I was so glad that this particular crew of musicians had such an amicable and positive relationship. But there are points in which there aren't total connections. There's almost like a discord. And in my musical approach, and this kind of is a long-winded answer to your question, John, but it's about letting those things coexist and not trying to like mitigate them and say, okay, well, can you sing a little bit more mellow and we'll up the energy a little bit so we can like kind of meet in the middle. To me, that's kind of watering down, and we're losing the what makes each tradition so unique and so powerful. So my approach was to really let everybody do what they do and in the best possible way. And I never told the singer, can you sing it like this instead of like, she's spent 30 years of her life mastering that art. And the more that one tries to meddle in the process and sort of, then she's no longer in her strongest place. So my idea in creating these ensembles is to let everybody be in their most powerful, strongest place. And even if that doesn't completely match what others in the ensemble are doing, those sort of those differences are actually beautiful too. And I welcome them, because I think it gives the music some kind of, and the performance, especially with the dance, And Vanessa is not a typical flamenco dancer. She's also has a whole wide range of vocabulary that draws from contemporary dance and even her own movements that she's developed on her own. And so that's again, and just the final piece of it is that when I choose collaborators, I always choose musicians who have experience in a variety of genres, that aren't just purely in one thing, that have mastered one language but have reached into other, have allowed themselves to be kind of immersed in different musical traditions, and that's kind of how these meetings are able to happen. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, they definitely are encounters, right? Like where not only there is a meeting, but there is people bringing their own sort of cultural weight onto these spaces. So that's fantastic, and our audience is enjoying it. For instance, Aaron Rubenstein is saying, "This is all so fantastic. Love hearing Amir's descriptions and responses. Such a gorgeous music. Thank you, Amir and KCA."
Thank you, Aaron. Aaron lives in Minneapolis. He's come to a couple of my performances.
Thank you for tuning in, Aaron.
Wonderful supporter of the music. Thank you, Aaron.
A beautiful city, Minneapolis.
So, do we have time to see one more video?
John.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So this final video is called Rivers of Sound, and I wanted to wrap up with a project that sort of encompasses so many of these different musical worlds and into one large ensemble. I started Rivers of Sound in 2015, and it's really an expansion of Two Rivers, the first group that we heard at the beginning of the program. So the same 6 musicians augmented with another 11 musicians that are coming from jazz and maqam, but also there's a South Indian mridangam player named Rajna Swaminathan. There's also oboe and English horn player who's more classically trained, but he's Egyptian and has heard and been steeped in that music all of his life, the Egyptian music. And then all of the other musicians, I mean, they maybe fall into the category of jazz or Arabic music, but they're all just so unique, and they're very, very strong and powerful personalities. So let's give a listen. This is Rivers of Sound at UMS in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 2017.
Wow, what a project!
Yeah, that was epic. It was the word that came to mind, just like the wave of music. It's incredible.
Thanks. Yeah, it's hard to represent that group because everybody. I mean, you need to hear each person solo. Each person's got their own bag of things that they can do, and it's just, yeah, it's always unique. You know, I realize in all of these, I hardly featured my trumpet, so maybe if we have a minute at the very end, I'll give a little live performance. I got my horn here,
Ooh.
because it's a big part of what I do is just translating all this Arabic and maqam and jazz and other influences into my trumpet. So maybe I'll give a little live show, 1 minute teaser at the end. I mean, there's plenty of other stuff online, but yeah. But I'd love to hear if there's questions or other from either you, Carlos, or John, or from the audience.
Well, let's bring the next Festival of Emerging Artists. They said a beautiful comment about you. Love all this sonic globe. It caught my eye. Turning in such a short time. Curious what similarities and differences you find working in all these forms. It is classical, contemporary, traditional, etc. Thanks. So I wonder, since you have been sort of mentioning all these encounters, all of these sort of translations, as you put it, if you could expand a little bit on what our friends at the next Festival of Emerging Artists sort of like are curious about or commented on.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and it's something that at the beginning, before entering a project, whatever the elements I'm trying to compose or work with seem like they're worlds apart. You know, for instance, the first time I composed for Two Rivers, the very first piece we did in 2006, I threw my hands up in the air at some point and said, you know, this isn't going to work. We'll just do a program, 30 minutes of jazz, 30 minutes of maqam, and you know, that's that. You know, let each musician and each tradition kind of exist in its own. But then, of course, you know, I thought maybe I should find a way, and at some point, you know, early on, it really felt like I was grabbing from this world and from this world, and sort of merging and trying to find ways of commonality, and you know, my approach at that point was to really go to like the DNA of the music, which what I mean is not taking the forms as we know them, like here's a song, here's a rhythm, but actually go dig underneath the surface and find what are the elements that make that song, what's the rhythmic pattern, how can it be adjusted, how can it, you know, where is it malleable? Okay, this is a maqam, this is a 7-note scale, but what are the smaller ingredients that make that? And when you break things down to their more like their core elements, then you can start to find new interstitial spaces and ways of connecting. And so in that space, and then eventually the process became so fluid that like the piece we heard at the beginning, which I composed in 2013, so 7 years later, I don't even know or think about whether this is coming from maqam or whether this is a jazz or what it is. But basically, in the process of creation, those labels and those names like contemporary, traditional, and classical kind of fall away, and we're just dealing with sound and actually with human beings and relationships. So it's almost a process of forgetting what we know or what we think, how we understand things.
Yeah, and it's so striking, you know, how many different types of artists just in this small segment that you shared with us tonight that you've touched on that you work with. So we do have another question from a user, Andres Luke, who on YouTube watching said, very enjoyable. Amir, as a fellow musician, what's it like working with such a wide variety of musicians? Do you get that tingly feeling too?
Yeah, I do, especially you know, with the wonderful musicians I've had a chance to encounter and work with, and yeah, it's a constantly inspiring process and enjoyable, and like I said, it doesn't come without its challenges, but I think, you know, finding people, in music, where I live is in the world of music. But if I were a visual artist, it would be something else. If I were a poet, but getting to go to different parts of the world, meet musicians, meet people who are coming from very different backgrounds, and understanding their perspectives also gives me a unique and new perspective on what I do, and kind of I start to explore and question my own assumptions and what I know. So, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of difficulty that we face being artists in this world, and financially, but also just I mean, traveling is wonderful. I love it, but it's when it's becomes a way of life, and carrying large instruments on the plane, and changing time zones, and then coming back and changing time zones again. It can get tiring, and there's a lot of administrative and other things that we have to do. We have to kind of be our own managers and agents and secretaries, all this stuff. But in the moment of performance, in the moment of even the rehearsal, it's just such an incredible and beautiful, magical feeling that it makes it totally worth it. So
yeah, absolutely. And speaking to that, and we keep encouraging our audiences to participate. We keep encouraging them to send their questions, their comments. We really get very excited when we see them appear on our screen. And to the point that you were mentioning, Mary Ma says, "Amazing. I am an American Chinese, and I figure out that other traditional musicians developing their music with coping a little bit with Western music, making their music traditional and pioneer." So what I think this is speaking to is that now you were starting to touch on like your personal experience as a musician, you've transcended that in a way. We were always trying, but you have sort of been successful at establishing yourself with these projects, right? But from your personal perspective, is like the what keeps you going type question, right? Like everything you're describing sort of speaks to that a little bit, but from a more sort of like internal perspective, like what is it that keeps you going in this journey of being a pioneer, like Mary herself, right? Of trying to cope with Western musical systems that is not only obviously the tuning, but it's the rhythmic approach. It's the way that the voice is supposed to sound, and all this aesthetic sort of discourse. So I wonder what makes you tick, man.
Yeah, and it's a question I have to ask myself, kind of on a regular basis, and I think it's just from as long as I can remember, even before I decided to be a musician, just when I first heard Louis Armstrong when I was a kid, it was the sound of his trumpet on Porgy and Bess, the record that he and Ella Fitzgerald did together, and my father loved Louis Armstrong. He was kind of his musical hero, and I just remember as a 2 or 3-year-old having this image of a beam of light that was breaking through the sky. It was so powerful and beautiful and just radiant and magical. And then, a couple of years later, I heard the Blues Brothers soundtrack, and that was, Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles and James Brown, and those voices spoke to me. And then a few years later, when I was about 9, and I first heard the Beatles, that was when I had this impulse to learn how to sing and play their songs. And I was just almost like it was an obsession or like a need to know. It wasn't just a passing curiosity. It really had it moved something deep inside of me. And I feel like from that age until now, there's always been something. A few years later, it was Miles Davis's trumpet. When I heard that, then I wanted to understand, how does he do that? How does he make that sound? I mean, it wasn't enough for me to just enjoy it as a listener. And something that I don't know where it comes from. And I'm just glad that I feel that and I have it. It's led me into all kinds of places I never imagined I would go. But then eventually the maqam and Iraqi maqam became the next subject. And so it's like this constant quest or constant journey. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there but what it actually is sort of listening to something that's inside. And I encourage students all the time to really pay attention to what moves them, and trust their feelings, and don't, even if the teachers say, well, you need to learn this and this, okay, spend time, learn your scales, but really find that thing that moves you, because it's revealing something about your nature and your own, who you are as an individual. So yeah, thank you
Beautiful.
for the question.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and definitely a quick shout out to Louis Armstrong, the Louis Armstrong House Museum in Corona, Queens. Everybody should once I know that tours are back happening there for sure.
Yeah.
And so Amira, we'll kind of like have one more question and then really go to the live demo, then we can wrap up. But curious, what's next? What project are you working on next? Is it one of your existing ones? Is there something new that you're conceptualizing? Is it ready to share out? What's coming up for you next?
Well, I don't want to reveal too much, but I'm looking at it right now. I'll show it to you in a second. Well, first of all, Rivers of Sound just released an album in September called The Other Shore. It's our second album. That's the large ensemble that you just saw at the end. And Rivers of Sound is going to be touring throughout the US in April. So I'm working right now around the clock to make all the arrangements and get that tour in order. It'll be, I think it's 6 concerts, and with the possibility of a 7th. And then in the fall, we'll be back on the road. It's been so tricky getting all of our stuff happening again. That tour was supposed to happen in 2020, and half of it got rebooked, and the other half we're trying to. So it's a juggling act. But I'm just can't wait to have to play with all 17 musicians again. And I'm going to just show you, because I did say I would, what else I'm working on, which is so my COVID obsession was modular synthesizer. And some of you might know what it is, some of you might not, but it looks something like this. And these are all individual modules that create some kind of sound or rhythmic pattern or effect, or there's a lot to it. It's quite a complicated art. I mean, it seems easy at first because you just plug it in and it makes a sound, but to find a sound that's actually good and beautiful, and in my case, because I have years of experience playing trumpet, and it's a new instrument, but I've been working on a solo performance with modular synthesizer and trumpet and voice and santur, and also I'm working with Lorenzo, who is the electronics musician that we just heard in the flamenco project. He and I are doing a project as well that I'll be using this on. So yeah, new things on the horizon. Do we have a minute for a little trumpet piece?
Of course we do.
I just want to sign off with this because I mentioned my hero, Louis Armstrong, and I'm not going to play Summertime or West End Blues, but I'm going to play a little maqam excerpt just so you can hear how it sounds.
Fantastic. Microtonal trumpet, people.
Yes.
You heard it here at Kupferberg
Yes.
Center for the Arts.
Indeed, indeed.
So, Amir, where else can our audience and everyone watching this broadcast, where can they find you, your projects, your next performances?
Yeah, my website, www.amiralsafar.com, which you can see on the bottom corner of your screen. Also, my Instagram page, Amir Al-Safar Official. And then Facebook, Amir Al-Safar. And also, my albums are on Spotify and Tidal and Apple Music and all that. If you want to hear stuff, and then on YouTube, I think if you search, hopefully you'll find some good videos there. I never know what people post. Sometimes there's some little cell phone camera that catches a glimpse of something, but you should find some complete performances there. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And you can always find out more about what's happening here at Kupferberg Center by checking out our website at kupferbergcenter.org. It's been a real pleasure this evening, Amir, sharing your music again. We really want to thank you, thank the folks at the Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation and the Jazz Touring Network. Carlos, thank you again for being here and holding down our virtual space. We did want to remind folks we will be continuing both here in this virtual space and returning in person. Tickets still are available for our Eddie Palmieri show this Saturday, November 20th, and much more to come, both here online and in person. So Amir, thank you so much. We're very excited to continue to watch your work and be a part of your unfolding conversation that you're having. It was really beautiful to have you here with us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and thanks, John and Carlos, both for these great questions and for making me feel nice and comfortable and my work appreciated. And yeah, I also want to personally thank Mid-Atlantic and Jazz Touring Network for making this program and also the first video that we saw possible. So we artists can't get by without this kind of support. So it's really wonderful and appreciated.
Excellent. Well, that takes us through this evening. We'll see everybody again real soon. Please be safe. Take care. Be well. Have a good night, folks.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.